Hello, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Robin Gavon, Senior Critic at Large. Today is the first Monday in May, which in the fashion world means that tonight is the Met Gala. The theme for this year's Costume Institute exhibition is In America, an anthology of fashion. The two chief architects of tonight's gala and the exhibition are with me tonight. And just as a reminder, the gala is the largest fundraiser for the Costume Institute. Please join me in welcoming Anna Wintour and Andrew Bolton.
Hi, Robin.
I'm so happy to see both of you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Nice to be here.
So, Andrew, I wanted to start with you because this exhibition is a bit unusual in that it is part two of a two-part exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about why that is and how this second part is distinguished from part one, which is currently on display?
Yeah, it's the first time we've actually staged a two-part exhibition. Last year it was the Costume Institute's 75th anniversary. And one of the original mission statements of the Costume Institute was that we would support and celebrate American fashion. That was one of our founding missions. And we actually hadn't staged an exhibition thematically on American fashion since the late 90s, even though we'd also staged exhibitions on Charles James, one of the most important American designers of the 20th century. So we very much wanted our anniversary to be a celebration of American fashion, particularly considering the struggles that many American designers went through during COVID. So that really was the sort of idea behind it, was to celebrate American fashion. And in terms of the theme, they're connected by language. The first part of the exhibition is creating a new vocabulary that emphasizes the more emotional and expressive aspects of American fashion. Usually, when one talks about American fashion, it's usually with the principles of American sportswear, like utility and practicality and simplicity. And the more emotional rhetoric is often reserved for European fashion. So we wanted to sort of readdress that imbalance. And part two is, again, about language, but it's more about storytelling. And it's very much about we've been looking into our collection for untold stories, looking at designers who may not be very well known to the general public. They may have been sort of relegated to the annals of fashion history for one reason or another. Maybe they weren't very successful business people. So part of it was actually to sort of readdress this sort of monolithic interpretation of fashion by telling these untold stories of designers, primarily female designers, that are represented in the Costume Institute's collection.
In that same vein, Anna, this is also the second the second gala associated with the exhibition. I mean, aside from the massive amount of work that entailed, I mean, how does that lend a different feeling, a different sensibility to the gala?
A sense of exhaustion. I think we were very, very determined after we had to cancel one of our exhibitions because of COVID. I mean, but open it without a party. And as you pointed out at the beginning of our conversation, the gala is really our main source of funding for the Costume Institute. So it was super important to us to open in September, even though it was a smaller footprint than we had originally envisioned, because we had originally planned for both shows to open at the same time because they're so complementary to each other, the way that Andrew has seen it. But we felt, for many reasons, we wanted to announce, along with New York Fashion Week and the reopening of Broadway and restaurants coming back, that New York was back and alive and celebrating all the things that we love about the city. So we decided to forge ahead in September under very difficult circumstances, really with the COVID protocols and people being nervous and having a much less robust team than usual. But we forge ahead. And it was a wonderful evening based on everything that Andrew's discuss with you. And then I don't think any of us at the museum wanted to in any way abandon what is such a known day in the year for us, which is the first Monday in May. So obviously we wanted to reclaim that date, and thankfully moving forward, we will only be doing one event a year. But the fact that everybody is now going to be able to see the two exhibitions as Andrew originally envisioned them together, because they complement each other so much, is fantastic. And the other point that I would love Andrew to talk to you a little bit about is that he has changed some of the costumes that are in the costume center itself. And there are two in particular that I think are going to be very meaningful to everyone. And Andrew, you probably are best to talk about those two pieces.
Yeah, as Anna said, part of the idea with Lexicon, we wanted to present it as a sort of living, organic exhibition. And so there's about 100 designers in the exhibition currently. And our intention was to be more inclusive in terms of the designers we were including. And so about a month ago, we rotated about 70% of the original designers in the exhibition. And as Anna said, I think there's a few meaningful ones, I think. One is a dress that Virgil created. We commissioned it from him for part 2 of the exhibition, for anthology.
This is Virgil Abloh.
I did actually for it to be the highlight of Lexicon. So when you walk down the stairs, that's the first one you'll see, and it's actually the last design that he created. And also we have a cape that was designed by Ralph Rucci for Andre. So both of those pieces really are homage and celebrations of two of fashion's incredible ambassadors for our field. Another one that I think is important is designed by Valentina, a designer who may not be very well known. She was hugely influential in her day, born in Kiev. So we wanted to show our support for Ukraine by showing a designer that represented the creativity within that culture.
And just to underscore for any of our viewers who may not be familiar, Virgil is a reference to Virgil Abloh, who was the founder of Off-White and the designer of menswear at Louis Vuitton, who recently passed away. And Andre is a reference to Andre Leontali, the veteran fashion editor. In keeping in that on that subject, one of the things that you've often spoken about, Andrew, has been the sort of philosophy, the guiding philosophy behind the Costume Institute's collecting. And I'm curious, how has the philosophy sort of changed in the last few years in order to broaden its scope in terms of the kinds of designers who are represented in exhibitions?
Yeah, I think, one of our underlying sort of criteria for any acquisition is the artistic merit of the object, and that's remained the same. So for every object that we collect, it is about the artistic merit of the object. That hasn't changed, but certainly we're being much more conscious and cognizant of diversifying our collection. We have, fashion and has needed for a long time to change its approach to diversity and inclusivity. And that also applies to collecting in the Metropolitan Museum. So certainly, even though the criteria for the object selections remain the same, we certainly are much more cognizant of being more inclusive and representative in our acquisitions collections.
Anna, I wanted to go back to the gala for a moment, which in many ways is kind of its own exhibition. Can you talk about one, the importance of continuing something that is so grand and festive at a time when I think probably some people feel that it may not necessarily be the best timing? And also the way in which the gala is intended to be this sort of dialogue between the exhibition and the broader culture as we know it.
Well, first and foremost, Robin, I really do want to emphasize, yes, there's a lot of extraordinary dresses seen on the Met steps, but the primary reason behind the Met opening is fundraising. And as I said before, this is our really only source of income to support the incredible work that Andrew does. It supports its operating costs, its acquisitions, it supports the cost of the exhibitions and everything else that goes with it. So that is our driving force, and it's one of the reasons that we were so enthusiastic to open in September. I also think it's become a symbol to the fashion industry of celebrating the very best in fashion. I think that people make extraordinary efforts. It's a red carpet that people truly enjoy. I think that they go full out, and I get emails from designers weeks up ahead saying, what do you think about this? How about this? And they really try and play with whatever the theme may be and have a lot of fun with it. And we can see from the extraordinary audiences that the red carpet achieves how much the public enjoys it too. And then, of course, the amount of attention that is given to the opening results in a fantastic number of visitors coming to see the exhibitions and also going into the Met itself. And these are probably people that wouldn't normally or wouldn't always be coming into the Met. So there's many reasons why we feel so passionately and so strongly that this is important. And it's a symbol, I think, for the creativity of fashion and having fun with fashion, but by far the most important reason is the fundraising, the attention that it brings to the exhibition and to the museum.
On that point about the attention that it brings to fashion, we did have a question from the audience, and that is from Megan in DC. And I should point out that Megan also used to be a Post staffer. And she raises the question that Tom Ford once said that the only thing about the Met that I wish hadn't happened is that it's turned into a bit of a costume party. I mean, do you at all worry that we see sort of less of those extraordinary haute couture gowns and a little bit more of, chandeliers on heads?
To me, what's wonderful about the Met is that it's such an incredible mix, and maybe there are, some outlets that tend to focus a bit more on the fantastical creations that you might see on Monday night. But if you are a true, fashion follower and you look at the carpet, you will see there is the most amazing mix. And in that mix are truly exquisite couture or ready to wear by wonderful designers. Not everything at all by any means is a chandelier or a teapot or whatever it may be. But what I personally enjoy, and I think why it does receive more attention than really any other carpet that I can think of, is that there is that mix. And there's a sense of adventure and daring and having fun with fashion that maybe at some of the other carpets is less in evidence.
Andrew, when we look at this part 2 of the exhibition, a lot of it will be situated in some of the period rooms at the Met. And I know that I had a chance to speak to you almost a year ago, and you were talking about how in the past the curatorial focus on those rooms often tended to be about the panel installation or the textiles, but that you hope to sort of broaden that conversation and broaden our understanding of those period rooms. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and what we may learn about the period rooms in this particular iteration of the exhibition?
Sure, Robin, as you said, the exhibition unfolds over 13 of the American period rooms. And as you say, the curatorial narrative in the past has often been prioritizing the stylistic elements of the rooms, or the architectural or aesthetic elements. And it hasn't always focused on more of the political or cultural aspects or histories of those rooms, and some of the more problematic narratives of those rooms as well. So part of the exhibition was to really do a deeper dive into the more complex and layered histories of those rooms. And align those histories with also, complex histories within fashion. So what we've tried to do is align a fashion story with a story that's very much located within the history of the room. And I should say also that all of those narratives or stories are being visualized by 9 different film directors. And it was important for us at the museum, the curators, to have those rooms activated in one form or another, and also to sort of enhance the immersive or intimate experience of those rooms. And by working with film directors, and it's been an extraordinary journey for us all, working with them, because each the stories, the curatorial stories, really have been enlivened by the interpretation of the different filmmakers. And also the filmmakers have put their own aesthetic stamp or creative vision on those particular rooms. So when you walk through the show, there's a wonderful, it is like an anthology, or a series of short films. These cinematic vignettes really end up being a feature film, but made out of 13 short films. So it's a very different approach than a traditional curatorial approach.
And I know you had mentioned that some of these rooms, which the families, the history of them involve, as much of American history does, stories about enslaved individuals, stories about sort of the negative aspects of some of the personalities. I mean, how is that sort of woven into the story of fashion?
Yeah, I mean, one example, maybe it's best to talk about an example of that. There's one room, called the Richmond Room, which, as you say, was owned by an individual, as many rooms were from Richmond and Virginia, wealthy landowners, by an enslaver, somebody who'd enslaved over 40 individuals. And in that particular room, in terms of the fashion story, we're focusing on someone called Fanny Chris Payne. He may not be very well known to the general audience, but Fanny Chris Payne was a leading sorry.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second.
Oh, sorry. So I think I was hearing something else. So it's focusing on a designer called Fanny Chris Payne, who was a leading dressmaker in Richmond. So it's a regional story. She was working at the turn of the 20th century, and it contextualizes her work as a Black dressmaker, building her business really in segregated Richmond. So it discusses the importance of this profession for American women, but it also explains how this was a period in which the transition of American fashion, moving towards the idea, the modern concept of designer. So Fanny Chris Payne was somebody who built her business within segregated Richmond and built a thriving business through dressmaking. And dressmaking was one of the few opportunities for women of color, but also women in general, to have more access to full citizenship within America. That's one example of one of the stories that we're trying to align with the history of the room and the history within fashion.
Is it accurate to say that the second part of the exhibition, if the first part sort of dealt with the vocabulary of American fashion, that the second part sort of deals with the culture and the context of how that vocabulary came to be?
Very much, Robin. I think in a way, anthology provides it's a preface to part one. It provides historical context for it. So it looks at the development of American fashion from the 19th century through to the mid to late 20th century. And it focuses really on, there's two overarching themes. The first one is the emergence of an identifiable American style. And the second is the emergence of the named designer, a creative individual in his or her own right. So both of those sort of elements, those themes, very much provide context for the lexicon, which is more about creating this new vocabulary. So definitely it's about providing historical context for part one.
I wanted to ask both of you this question because each of you sort of grew up outside of the US. And I'm wondering how that sort of early sense of distance from, the center of American life has given you, has influenced your perspective on the way in which you sort of see American designers operating on an international stage. And if I might start with you, Anna, I mean,
Sure.
how do you see American designers sort of fitting into the global story?
Well, the whole world of fashion, as you well know, Robin, has opened up so dramatically over the last several years. And it used to be because there were more information didn't travel nearly as fast as it does today. And I think fashion is truly global, and it comes from so many different parts of the world, whether it's Africa or Australia or the more traditional countries like England, France, Italy, etc. But what's amazing today, working as I do across many territories, is that you are exposed to the best talent in the world in a way that is so much easier than it used to be. And I feel that in the past, and maybe this is what you were talking about growing up in England, the Brits were kind of more eccentric and weird and love to sort of dress up in maybe what was it Megan thinks is very costumey. But the Americans were always known for a much more sort of sleek, minimal, Calvin kind of a style. And I think what's so extraordinary, particularly when you look at the exhibition that we opened first in September, is how diverse, what a glorious mix of styles we see in American fashion today, and how American fashion is really being recognized. Look at Virgil going to Vuitton, Matthew Williamson to Givenchy. Like, people are not choosing designers based on a country, they're choosing them based on talent. And just going back to the question again about what you see on the carpet at the Met, what I love also is that it is a celebration of what I think both Andrew and I see as fashion today, which is not one style, not one country, just this glorious mix of individuality and creativity. And I hope that's what people will take away from seeing these two extraordinary exhibitions together as they were originally conceived, and also the joy I think that you will see on the carpet.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, I mean, what would you like to add to that in terms of being the British, having the British perspective on American fashion?
I think, as Anna said, I think one of the most interesting things about American fashion is its diversity. And I think often there's a sort of, seems to be a need or an urgency to come up with an overarching sort of universalizing definition of what is American fashion. And I don't think that's possible. I think fashion, particularly American fashion, is about diversity. It's about different diversity of aesthetics. And the metaphor that we use in Lexicon, the first part of the exhibition, was the idea of the American quilt, and about how American fashion literally is like an American quilt. American quilt the quilt is a metaphor for America and the diverse identities within America, and that also applies to American fashion, the diversity of aesthetic expressions within American fashion. So in the exhibition, we have 100 sort of quilt squares, so to speak, with designers representing their own aesthetic visions. And it's extraordinary when you walk through the exhibition that there's 100 definitions of American fashion, not just one. So I as Anna said, to me, American fashion really is about these diverse aesthetics and these diverse opinions. And what's been, for me, really inspiring is how American designers really are at the forefront of conversations about sustainability, about diversity, about inclusivity, and that's very much driving a lot of the creative expression within America today. And it's been very inspiring to witness.
People are always asking about what impact the pandemic has had on a particular industry, and the idea that with fashion we would all sort of go forward wearing nothing but sweatpants. Anna, is the dress code for the gala, Gilded Glamour, a bit of a rebuke to that notion?
It's not a rebuke. It's a soft encouragement to enjoy being dressed up. And I think people are loving it, Robin, the idea that they're going to go out and see their friends and people will be dressed. I mean, that's part of the fun of the night, just to see what people are wearing, and people make such an extraordinary effort. It's really wonderful to see. And, talking to colleagues around the world, we are very encouraged to see that sales of fashion are actually very strong here in the United States. And I think that is a result, and I know so many people in our business, and as you know, we tried so hard to help in this, it's a relatively small way, but as best we could through the work we did with A Common Thread. But I do think that fashion is back. People are enjoying getting dressed up. They're looking forward to Monday night, and I think it's about self-expression and creativity and individuality and inclusion and diversity and all the things that Andrew mentioned earlier. So I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with having some fun.
And Andrew, I'll give the last word to you very quickly. If there is a particular room or garment or vignette that you are particularly excited about in this exhibition, I'm asking you to choose your favorite child.
Oh my gosh!
Never get to that.
I like them. I like the rooms for so many different reasons. I think one of the rooms that at least is important for American fashion is the Vandal in Panorama, which is a room that looks at a panorama of Versailles in the early 19th century, and the theme is Battle of Versailles. And it's being restaged by the Battle of Versailles was a fashion show that pitted 5 American designers against 5 French designers. Robin, you wrote that incredible book about it. It was a moment that was pivotal for American fashion. It was a moment that actually put fashion on the international scene. So for me, I love that room because of the message that it actually contains, and the fact that it was an apex and this sort of emergence of American fashion on the international scene. And Tom Ford, who is the director visualizing that story, has reinterpreted it as a contemporary martial arts battle that was morphing into a fencing battle. So I think that's one of my favorite rooms, just because of the meaning of that actual theme to American fashion.
They're sort of flying through the air.
It's very Mulan, Robin.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that is, nothing else, a fantastic tease for people to come and to see the exhibition. And with that, I'm going to have to call it because we are out of time. Thank you very much to both Anna and Andrew for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Robin.
I hope you.
And if you are looking for more information about upcoming events, please go to WashingtonPostLive.com. I'm Robin Gabon, and thank you for joining me.